Good afternoon, friends. I think it's time we start. I request Professor Kamraj to accompany the Professor E.G. Ramachandran, Professor Ranganathan, and Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy onto the dais, please. Welcome to this first lecture of Professor E.G. Ramachandran Distinguished Lecture Series to all of you. It's a special moment, particularly personally to me, because my guru and his guru are there on the dais. I welcome all of you once again. I request Professor Kamraj, our head of the department and the person behind this whole show of today, to come forward and welcome the delegates.
Respected Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy, Director IIT Madras, respected Professors E.G. Ramachandran, Professor S. Ranganathan, IISc Bangalore, Professor Murthy, distinguished guests, my dear colleagues, staff, students, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Department of Metallurgical and Materials Engineering and Indian University of Metals, Chennai chapter, it is my pleasure to welcome you all for this first lecture of Professor E.G. Ramachandran Distinguished Lecture Series. I am very happy to introduce Professor E.G. Ramachandran because many of you may not be knowing, including our faculty members, that he was the first professor and first head of the Department of Metallurgical Engineering, IIT Madras, in 1961. In fact, our department established in 1959. Then I asked him, why did you delay it for 2 years? Then he told me the first 2 years is a general subject. So the third year onwards metallurgy started. That's how 1961 he joined. And he is considered as an architect of this foremost department in India. He obtained his BSc, MSc from University of Mysore. And later on he got his PhD from University of Sheffield. Then he worked as a faculty member nearly about 9 years in Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Then later on he moved to National Metallurgical Laboratory, Jamshedpur, as an assistant director, and he served there for about 5 years. Then he was invited to IIT Madras in 1961 as the first professor of the Department of Metallurgical Engineering. He was also director in charge for IIT Madras for a brief period. And Professor E.G. Ramachandran dedicated himself his teaching, research and development in metallurgy in the country, and he has inspired many metallurgists even today in India and abroad. He was also elected as the chairman of Indian Industrial Metallurgy Division of Indian Institute of Metals in 1978. Today we are sitting here because of one man, for the generosity of one student of our E.G. Ramachandran, Mr. Hooke Jain. He has generously contributed for initiating this lecture series. So that's why we are sitting here. I am very much thankful to Dr. Hooke Jain. Also, I would like to thank Professor Murthy, who is the one all along he was continuously driving to organize this event. I would like to thank Professor Murthy also. And at this juncture, I would like to appeal to all the guests here, also distinguished professor on the dais, that our department is very keen to initiate the chair position on the name of Professor E.G. Ramachandran. and I seek your solid help and support from all of you. I am sure that this can be done in few years' time. So with these few words, I welcome you all once again for this lecture series, first lecture on Professor E.G. Ramachandran Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Kamraj. Now I request Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy to felicitate Professor E.G. Ramachandran in our traditional way. I request Manjusha to come forward. We originally thought we will not have flower bouquets for this function, but then I was surprised today morning when I saw a big flower bouquet landing into my room, sent by one of his past students from US. This lady is Thelma Follett. I request Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy to give away this bouquet. Manjusha, please, can you carry it? I will just read a few sentences from her email. She wrote a long mail to me, and she says, some years ago, she says, I had the pleasure of having Professor Ramachandran as my professor for basic materials engineering course in San Jose State University. I was an unlikely student for materials engineering as I came from arts and literature background. When others in the department gave up on me, Professor Ramachandran took over. Due to his kindness, wide-ranging knowledge, and special teaching abilities, I passed the course and also developed a long-lasting interest in materials. So I thank Thelma for this kind gesture. And now I request Professor, a few of the people in the department who have closely associated with Professor Ramachandran to come forward. Professor Sheshadri to say a few words of his association with Professor EGR.
Dear Professor Ramachandran, Professor Ranganathan, Bhaskar Ramurthy, Professor Murthy, Kamraj, my colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here to felicitate Professor EGR, the founding father for this department. In 1961, he started this department. He was both the first professor and the first head of the department. And fortunately for us, the IIT system in its wisdom had decided that metallurgical engineering knowledge must be a core domain for budding engineers to build the temples of modern India. And it is with this foresight of Pandit Nehru and others that metallurgy department was started in 4 of the IITs, even though there were a few others in other sectors earlier. And it fell upon Professor Ramachandran to nurture the early stages of the department, which is both challenging and rewarding. And one must admit that it's to the credit of Professor Ramachandran that he nurtured it to what it is today. And of course, most of these departments have an accent depending on where they are located. And of course, Madras was a hub of auto ancillary and on its way to becoming the Detroit of India. And it was only fitting that the stress in the department was essentially on the structure property correlations and their impact on the manufacturing sector. And so the industrial metallurgical activities as they were known became the forefront and the bias of this department, and it has been like that for these years, for the good of this area. As I rightly mentioned, I think he was the president of the Indian Institute of Metals, which is a fitting tribute to his contribution to this sector and from this part of the country. On a personal front, even though some of the other colleagues who will be speaking after me have had a longer association, I had 2 stints of my contact with Professor Ramachandran. And on the official front, of course, I found him very approachable and cordial and courteous, with a bit of a restraint and a British sense of humor rather than the American one. And then, of course, on a personal front, he was always very friendly and warm, and a very personal touch in inquiring about your health, your family, your well-being. And I think it is this warmth and personal touch that provided the coherence needed for the early stages of this department, which he has nurtured it to such a great strength. And it is in fitting of things that series of lectures is being organized in his honor. And it's even more fitting that one of his star pupils is going to deliver the first lecture today. And of course, it is even more satisfying that Professor Ramachandran is going to be with us on this very day. And all I could hope and pray to God is that he bestows upon him health and happiness so that he can be available and present and be present in many of these editions to follow in the coming years. With these few words, I thank the organizers, wishing Professor Ramachandran a healthy years to come. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Professor O. Prabhakar, please.
Hello to everybody. And I mean the 1965 batch, first met Professor E.G. Ramachandran on the IIT cricket field, right? And it was a cricket match between staff and the students. And Professor E.G.R. was the opening batsman for the staff. And he came in his white flannels and scored a pretty decent 30 plus. And that was the highest score for the staff. That was the first meeting that we had with Professor E.G. Ramachandran. Of course, we had been hearing his name right in the hostel. Right? That was the first thing. Before that, I just had to say one thing. I would like to really express my appreciation to Professor Kamaraj and Professor Murthy for taking the initiative in organizing this one, right? So the younger generation still remembers the contribution of the older generation. It's a remarkable thing, right? Now the second time he came and taught us the advanced metallurgical techniques, and including thermal techniques, differential thermal analysis, and so on, right? Sarathi must be remembering. And you all know the importance of thermal techniques in the modern metallurgy. In fact, Sargam Metals, who make a lot of reprocessing of secondary grade aluminum alloys, Professor E.G.R. knows Mr. Sarathi very well, Santanam Sarathi and all. And we recently executed a project for them with thermal analysis to determine the tramp elements. And I'm very happy to say, maybe the director would be very happy, that we collaborated with Dhwani, that is in the IIT Park, Technical Park, and reasonably is a very patented word of Professor E.G. Ramachandran, right? He's very fond of saying reasonably quite often, right? And later he took theory of metals for us. You all know that metallurgy topics are extremely dreary. Engineering metallurgy, one need not ask, right? You have to really fight it hard to keep yourself awake. Believe me, Professor E.G. literally used to hijack the class to a different level. And that was theory of metals. And we talked of all the latest things in that. Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle, right? He used to explain it with a thought experiment. It was just brilliant. Right? It just gets etched in your mind, the whole principle. Of course, later in the corridor near the bathroom, we used to discuss. Probably if the photon wavelength is reduced by 100 million times, the Heisenberg principle would have vanished, right? He put the seed in us to think and discuss all high topics, right? That was the most satisfying thing in our stay here. Right? We must ponder why so many IIT students, and they were, you must have seen the IIT alumni email circuit. It is buzz with this news that a lecture is being arranged in his honor, right? It's full of that information. Are you going? Please go. Why are you sitting in Chennai, not attending? I said, who said I am not attending? I am attending. Why, how this professor is creating so much of reaction from the alumni of the institute, right? Because we all have heard him in the class explaining difficult concepts and explaining all latest concepts with ease and felicity. And we have seen it, we have heard it. And you all know that the IITians are suckers for brains. So if a good brain comes, we step aside and applaud. So all the students very spontaneously appreciate and regard Professor E.G. Ramachandran. This is a very spontaneous reaction, really unbelievable, right? He is also a man of very high integrity and very high ethical standards. Unbelievable, impeccable. I mean, you don't find such a person in the Indian society, probably not. Maybe some are there. I don't want to make a sweeping statement, right? Logically, a mal observation. I don't want to do that. Right? We do have people, directors who take, no, I'm not meaning IIT director, you know, let me not be misunderstood, who take a lot of credit for others' thing. No, not with Professor E.G. Ramachandran. The moment a student gets his PhD under his guidance, his statement is, now you are on your own. You don't have to put my name unless I have made a good contribution towards the paper. That is the statement he normally tells all his students. Absolutely, I find it fantastic, right? Right? The student is free to publish. So whenever we feel we have taken his help, we seek his guidance, we put his name. One of my colleagues, Professor HMD Roshan, he went to him to seek his blessings and advice before he took over the headship of the department. And I believe Professor appears to have told him, do not neglect teaching, even if you have considerable amount of administrative work. I think that explains his mindset. Teaching, that is where he was, right? He spent, and that is where I would say he really got the admiration and appreciation of his old students. I will not be completing my, this guy, Professor Murthy gave me only 2 minutes, right? 2 minutes are not enough for me. Mrs. E.G. Ramachandran, popularly known as Madam, is a very adorable and charming lady, right? And she used to play host in all the dinners that the EGRs used to give it to students. I know why. I used to be called more often. That time I was very thin, less than 54 kilos. Probably thought this fellow needs some good food. Right? They used to invite me quite often. And Madam used to cook all the dishes, including the sweet. We all know her famous payasam, right? For as many as 30 to 40 students, she used to cook. She's a remarkable woman, and she will go out of the way to make one comfortable, right? And she will remember all the details about our children, what they are doing, everything she will remember and ask us about them in an extremely pleasant manner. My respects to her. Right? Professor is well known for his wit and very good repartees, and they can be very effective, right? But I'll pass them, right? If you want any issue, you can contact me later. He has got many jokes, he has cracked many jokes. My association with him is more than 50 years. Incidentally, my house is only a few streets away from his, so the association continues even after retirement, right? I do not know what the present level of my karma meter, but I have a hunch that this association is going to continue for many more cycles, right? He is warned. Sir, all of us who are your students, we thank you very much for providing a touch of class in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, ever since we declared about this lecture, the number of emails that are flooding to me, if I start reading them, it will be a few hours, I should say. In fact, one of those emails have even made us to do something for the first time, possibly at least our department, is to web telecast this whole program. Right now, this is all live. Anywhere in this world, you can watch this whole program that's going on. In fact, some of the people in US started saying, Murthy, it's midnight for us. Then I said, we are going to make this program available even for the next 24 hours, anytime you can watch. So that's the kind of thing the students of his, who affectionately, remember him and want to watch him, want to see him from far off places. So now I request Professor Pathak to come forward for a few minutes. Professor Pathak.
Well, I think when I must join Professor Prabhakar first. After all, I am his student. In expressing and endorsing whatever views he has expressed about Professor E.G. Ramachandran as a very good person to enthuse and encourage young students to do well in courses which were very tough but could be made very easy by his concepts and very easy way of teaching. I must also indicate here that when Professor Murthy and Professor Kamraj indicated to me that please come, I said, well, I'm coming immediately. It was a happiness to be here on 3 scores. One, of course, I'm always happy to be in IIT Madras. Secondly, to come when Professor E.G. Ramachandran is present itself is a tremendous boost to all of us here. And thirdly, a very apt first lecture to be given by Professor S. Ranganathan, the Doyen of Metallurgists. We have 2 Doyens here, Professor E.G.R. and his student, Professor S. Ranganathan. It's a triple bonanza for all of us, at least for me. Being in IIT itself is a bonanza. I must mention here that my first meeting with face-to-face with Professor E.G.R. I didn't know he was Professor E.G.R. Same thing as Professor Prabhakar met him in the cricket field. I didn't meet in a cricket field, but it was in an interview room. It was on a very sultry May day in Chennai, To be exact, on 1st May 1970, I had just then completed 24 and my postgraduate diploma at NIT Nagpur, that time VRC Nagpur. And I came here sweating, of course, most of it was because of the heat and 50% was because of the nervousness of the interview. So when I entered the interview room, there were all stalwarts sitting and Professor EGR made the atmosphere so very cool by his initial comments to the person who is entering that room. It really made me give possibly a good account of myself on that day. Well, within 15 days I had a call from IIT Madras. Of course, a letter used to come that you are selected and we wish you to join at the earliest possible. Well, I must indicate here that those days we didn't have high-tech computers, softwares, sending emails, attachments, scanned copies and so on. But still, the results of the interview came in 15 days to my Nagpur address. That is how I got, later on when I came here, I was told Professor EGR was the one who was interviewing all of us there. So I hope, sir, my stay here in IIT Madras was made possible by you, and I really wish to find out whether I am sure that I have not disappointed you too much over all these years. Then I was a student also. During my MS, Professor Prabhakar has a large number of courses to be offered by Professor EGR. I was doing my MS here, and there was a course on special experimental technique. And his approach to the course which I went through was so simple that most of us used to feel at the end of the class, oh, it's so simple, tomorrow I need not come. And then they used to miss the class because the subject is so very simple, and then come back and read the thing and they find it very difficult. So what I am trying to say here is Professor E.G. Ramachandran's way of putting difficult concepts very easily in the classroom was a tremendous thing, and that is how I think most of us used to do very well in his courses. Later on, my interactions with him, of course, he was also the, before becoming president of the Indian Institute of Metals, he was the IIM chapter chairman for a very, very long time. And I was privileged to be his sometimes secretary, sometimes treasurer. And the experience which we gained by working under him on these courses helped us in future when our turn came to operate the Chennai chapter of the Indian Institute of Metals. I remember that last time when we had Professor EGR present here was in 2006 December, which was again a meeting of doyens. There was late C.V. Sundaram, Professor EGR was there. C.V. Sundaram could not visit the earlier NMD where he was given the Lifetime Achievement Award, and that award was presented here in this particular very hall under the Department of Metallurgy's ISRS 2006. And Shri B. Muthuraman, when he came to the department, he was also his first student, Shri B. Muthuraman. His visit to the department, we could get Professor E.G. Ramachandran to the MSB 104. We all know MSB 104, the Metallurgical Seminar Hall. And it was nice to see Professor E.G. Ramachandran there present when Shri B. Muthuraman was interacting with all of us, young students, faculty. And Shri B. Muthuraman indicated to me later on that he was the happiest to meet and see Professor E.G. on that particular day. Coming to the activities which Professor Prabhakar has already mentioned, he was an avid sportsman. Tennis was, of course, his forte. And I have seen him in the staff club in the evenings playing his tennis. And if I may say so, maybe tennis has lost his metallurgy's gain. I think he had that Ranganathan touch in the tennis. Very silken way of putting ball in a corner where the youngsters cannot come and take that ball. the tennis wrist which he had made him hit 4s and 6s in the cricket matches. We used to have cricket matches between staff and student, interdepartmental matches and so on. And I happened to be his partner in one of the matches. I was on the non-batting side, non-striker, and of course he was the batsman. And I thought there is a single in that particular shot, and then he told me, Pathak, don't run. And when he went on hitting the next 5 balls for 4s, but he was very swift. When my turn came to face the ball, he ran for 1. So there was not lack of swiftness, it was that the intent was I should be in the action, and I could, I was very happy that I didn't get tired by running, and 4s and 6s only won the match for us most of the time. Sir, I must again congratulate the Department of Metallurgy, who has grown under the initial nurturing and initial guidelines given by Professor E.G. Ramachandran. It came from metallurgical engineering. Industrial metallurgy was, of course, our strong fold. Moved on with that foundation to metallurgical and materials science. The foundation was laid by Professor E.G.R. With the onset of developments, now we have also become metallurgical and materials engineering. I must mention here that Professor Kamraj, Professor Murthy, and the entire department has taken a big step in initiating and starting this endowment lecture of Professor E.G.R. We wish that, as indicated by others, there will be many more years where Professor E.G.R. himself would be present here amongst us. And Professor Ranganathan is going to set the ball rolling by giving us the first lecture on the endowment lecture series. I wish that this process continues perennially. Sir, we wish you a very, very long life and wish that your blessings continues to be with us all the time to come. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Pathak. We are really grateful that Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy has agreed to grace this occasion and to be amongst us. I request Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy to come forward and give his presidential remarks.
Thank you. Let me first offer my deep respects to Professor E.G. Ramachandran, Professor Ranganathan. I have really not known either of them till today. Of course, I've heard of Professor E.G. Ramachandran. And I was a student here, I think, when he was still on this faculty. But I was in faraway electrical engineering. I don't think I ever crossed his path. By the time I joined the faculty, I just found out he retired in 1985, long ago. So we never we were never on the faculty together. Anyway, what really makes me extremely happy today is a few things. One is to see this hall so full. We conduct so many events here. Of course, very often the events are highly specialized events, and it's not surprising that the hall is only partially full. But today, the spontaneity with which so many generations of students and former and current students who want to know about Professor E.G. Ramachandran, also to hear Professor Ranganathan, to see the spread and enthusiasm with which people have come today. This is really, really heartwarming. In fact, the kind of response that this has received, as was mentioned by Professor Murthy, and sort of encapsulated so vividly by this huge bouquet that one thoughtful former student has sent all the way from the US. It's really, I think no awards can ever substitute for this kind of response and show of gratitude. I think this would probably make Professor E.G. Ramachandran's day, and I'm very happy on his behalf and on behalf of the institute that we are able to show that it's not always that we forget or what we owe to those who have built the institution, to those who have taught, who have given so much of themselves to teach
a whole generation of people. So that's really what makes me very happy today. Particularly today is, for some of you may not know, that there is a Navaratri also in April, and today is the first day of the Saraswati Puja of the Navaratri. This is an apt day that they have chosen to honor Prof. E.G. Ramachandran. I am really extremely happy that due to the what you might call the meaning behind this event, and it has all been triggered by this generous alumnus who has remembered his teacher. I would like to, on behalf of everybody, thank Dr. Pukhraj Jain for this gesture. I am sure this lecture, which will be held every year, will continue to evoke this kind of pure response from, as I said, not only from past students, from past associates, but from future generations of students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy. I now request Professor EGR to say a few words in response. You can sit here.
Professor Ramurthy, Professor Ranganathan, Professor Kamraj, Professor Murthy, and my young friends. I am really overwhelmed by the references made to me by all the previous speakers. I do not know really what to say. My memory goes back 28 years ago when there was a similar function when I reached the age of 60 and was about to retire from the IIT. There was a big function in the old Central Lecture Theatre and a number of speeches were made at that time. I said at that time that much of what was said was out of goodwill but not necessarily good sense. And I continue to hold that view even today. Much of what was said is only out of goodwill towards me, but not necessarily out of good sense. I am particularly glad that Professor Ranganathan has agreed to give the first lecture. I don't know how many of you have grandchildren. There is a special bond between grandparents and grandchildren. And he is a sort of grand student to me because his teacher, Professor Raman, was my first student. And I have a special rapport with him like grandfathers have towards their grandchildren. I don't know how many of you are great-grandfathers. We are one. We recently became great-grandparents. And I feel that way towards Professor Murthy, who is a student of Professor Ranganathan. I think I have spoken enough nonsense, and I would just like to thank all of you for coming and felicitating me. I turned 88 on the 7th of April, and I really appreciate this gesture on the part of Mr. Pukhraj Jain for having instituted this series of lectures. I remember him as my student in the same batch as Prabhakar, 1965. And I had lost touch with him, but he had not lost touch with me. some few years back, we resumed contacts, and he has been my close friend ever since. I thank both Professor Kamraj and Professor Murthy for taking so much trouble over organizing this function. I know the extent of trouble they have taken, and if there is any credit to be associated for organizing this beautiful function, all the credit must go to them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Ramachandran. I am sure so many people all over the world are waiting to see and listen to him. I mean, it's really amazing that so many people are waiting. And I'm sure that tomorrow there will be so many mails that would come to me thanking us for having done this. So I would like to thank Pukraj for having made this possible and having initiated this particular event called Professor E.G. Ramachandran Distinguished Lecture Series. Now I request Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy to felicitate Professor Ranganathan in a traditional way. I request Professor Kamraj to give a small memento to the dignitaries on the dais. Professor Ramachandran first. Professor Ranganathan. And Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy. There is a small memento from Pukraj to Professor E.G.R. Professor. I will tell the secret. It seems I have come to know that Professor E.G.R. loves sweets, loves chocolates. So these are chocolates that have been sent by Pukraj. So now it's a pleasure to me to give a very brief introduction to Professor Ranganathan. Professor Ranganathan is a student from this city, from the Loyola College, and then went to IISc to have his BE, and then to Cambridge to have his PhD. And he has started in various fields, initially with field ion microscopy, very popular first images on field ion microscopy he is associated with. And then also another field where he is very popularly associated with is grain boundary structure. Anybody who talks of CSL, coincidence site lattice, they all have to owe it to him. And then quasicrystals, glasses, nanocrystals, and in recent times his interest grew in wood steel, the heritage. In fact, last 1 year he has been teaching in Japan the heritage, materials heritage. He is very impatiently waiting. I now leave it to him at the dais.
Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy, Dynamic Director of IIT Madras, Professor E.G. Ramachandran, Doyen Metallurgist, Teacher of Teachers, Architect of the department here, and you laid the foundation for the department at Bangalore, IISc Bangalore, and also a researcher extraordinary with a fantastic grasp of industrial practices. And Mrs. Matangi Ramachandran, Professor Kamraj, Professor Murthy, and faculty and friends and students. Professor E.G. Ramachandran made a reference to one great grand student of his, namely Professor Murthy. But I find in the hall there are many other great grand students. So I would like all of them to remember that they can trace their lineage back to this giant among metallurgists, Professor E.G. Ramachandran. In the traditional Hindu sense of introduction, one does a self-introduction. Abhivadye, Angrasa, Gargya, Shainya, Trayarisha, Pranarvadaka. That would be my normal Abhivade. But today I would like to say, so C.V. Raman, Professor E.G. Ramachandran, and Professor T.R. Anantharaman, I trace my lineage from these giants. Professor Raman taught Professor E.G. Ramachandran. In turn, Professor Ramachandran taught Professor Anantharaman. Professor Anantharaman has recorded his love for physical metallurgy stems from the wonderful lectures that he listened to from E.G. Ramachandran. These were so powerful, so fascinating that Professor Anantharaman passed them on to me. So if today, if I say my sutra is physical metallurgy, it goes back to you, sir. I thank you for that. In a recent Oscar award, the winner of the 3-time Best Oscar Award said he has had more than his fair share of good fortune. I can repeat that sentence. I've had more than my fair share of good fortune in my life, and among those good fortunes is to deliver the first distinguished E.G. Ramachandran lecture. I really, truly cherish this. It's a great honor, and I may say here that in framing this lecture, I wanted to weave in Professor Ramachandran's interests, my interests, Professor Anantharaman's interests, and of course the interests of all of you. And when I put the title as Across Time and Space, I didn't realize that this will be webcast. So it is going across time and space. I know that people across the world are also going to see us looking at these various functions, lectures, and so on and so forth. I'm very happy. I must also confess here that when Professor Kamaraj wrote to me, I accepted the invitation on condition that this lecture series should be sustained. It's very important because we are very good at creating things, but sustaining them is not so easy. So I'm hoping year after year, in the month of April, we'll have the great opportunity and pleasure of listening to the E.G. Ramachandran 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th distinguished lectures as we go along. Now, let me state that if I give my designations as Emeritus Professor IISc, I owe it to Professor Ramachandran in a way. I was a professor of IISc, he was in the selection committee, and I'm glad even after 30 years lapse, he still has confidence and has asked me to give this lecture, as it were. I am also Homi Baba visiting professor, but I must tell you, I was for a year a guest professor in the Tokyo University of the Arts. Here we are in the Indian Institute of Technology, but I spent one whole year at the Tokyo University of the Arts. When I set out on that journey, many people expressed skepticism. Hey, you are a metallurgist, what are you going to do in a University of the Arts? I came across a famous quotation by Rabindranath Tagore, who said, every now and then, you must move away from your comfort zone, geographically and metaphorically. So going to Japan was geographically a trip, and metaphorically going into heritage and conservation. So I'm very glad I did that. But what was a major discovery was that heritage and conservation are really based on materials research. And that is why I'm able to talk today, imaging of molecules and materials across time and space. If I had given this lecture a year ago, there would have been no molecules, there would be no time. It will be only imaging materials in space. So I'm very happy that I've had this opportunity, and I'm going to now proceed with this lecture. This is a statement by Pascal. It is not the grandeur of the universe that is incredible, but the mind of man that has measured it. So we are all fortunate that we have brains with which we can comprehend the grandeur of the universe. If you look at it, there are 75 trillion cells in our body, 100 billion neurons with all the connections. This is what makes us look at things and so on and so forth. In a way, in understanding the universe, we have to understand ourselves. I've given the timeline, and in fact, when I talk about in time and space, we can go back in time almost to 4.5 billion years, if not more, because some of the materials we can now study come back from almost the origin of the universe, certainly the origin of the Earth. So 15 billion years ago, the universe came into being. 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth came into being. 2.5 billion years life. 1 million years ago, we started walking. And 60,000 years ago, we became cognizant of the world around us. It's not a bad thing that if many of us are a small fraction only of the 60,000 years, but still we are there. Now, the lecture is on imaging, microscopy. Some years ago, at the end of the last century, my good friend Arunachalam asked me to write an article for Materials Challenge for the 21st century, what microscopy would be like at the end of the 21st century. All of us know it's difficult to predict, especially the future, but I still attempted it. I wrote an article called Yashoda's Vision, Microscopy at All Levels. I was, of course, influenced by the poetic words of William Blake, who said, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a flower. I was even more taken by Yashoda's vision, where she saw in Krishna's wide open mouth all the galaxies and the universe. In fact, she saw herself looking into Krishna's mouth. It's a fantastic thing, beautiful vision. So I wrote about all that and said how microscopy will progress. But I'm sorry to state that I'm a very poor prophet. Within 7 years of my predictions, all of them have come true. And in fact, microscopy has advanced far beyond what I could imagine. So I will not attempt any more predictions, only report to you some of the progress that has taken place. Now, everything revolves around our eye. I said about the brain, but the brain gets its message mainly through the eye. And our spatial resolution of the eye is dictated by our size. The retina, the space between rods and cones. So we can distinguish objects which are 0.1 millimeter apart. That means 100 microns. That sets the scale. Because we are human beings with this kind of physical structure, that is what we can see. But when you know the size of the hydrogen atom is 1 angstrom, if I want to see an atom of hydrogen, I have to magnify by 1,000,000 times, which looked like a distant goal, but today it's very easily done. Similarly, what has come into being now in recent times is the time factor of it. We are not satisfied with just looking at static images. We all want to go to the cinema, see things in motion, we want motion in 3D and so on. So the temporal resolution is a fraction of a second. So if the pictures come into our eyes faster than that, then it looks like a continuous motion. And the mechanism of vision, which we understand now reasonably well, took quite some time. Many famous people have contributed to our idea of vision. This includes Kepler, Descartes, Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton. And I would like to draw attention to work by one Nobel laureate in a few minutes. He drew attention to the Middle East contribution to science, and in particular that of Al-Hasan, known as Ibn al-Haytham, who lived from 965 to 1040. He mastered optics. Not so well known, but slowly these facts are coming into light. He titled his book, Ahmad Zawal, as Micrographia of the 21st century. I'll come back to it as why it's called Micrographia. It's about microscopy, micrographs and so on. Now we are dealing with spatial resolution of 50 picometers and temporal resolution of femtoseconds. It's amazing things that we can look at things that happen in a femtosecond, chemical reactions if you like, and other things, and also distance between objects which are as little as 50 picometers. Well, we know about millimeters, micro, nano, pico, femto, so the world has advanced further in terms of space. The range of microstructure is shown here. The largest microstructure, if you like, is the Great Wall of China, 5,000 kilometers. It once is a macrostructure. But I put it in because it is the only man-made object which can be seen by astronauts walking on the surface of the moon. It's so large that even from such a great distance, you can identify the Great Wall of China. Everything else is small. You need some microscopes. You need microcrystals, 0.1 millimeter, nanocrystals. And of course, if you want to probe the crystal unit cell, is only 1 nanometer. And the atom is only 0.1 nanometer. So our range in terms of space has widened. And here is a slide from Dr. Muralidharan, who has shown that processing structure properties have been looked at in terms of the structures. You have wonderful programs here in nanotechnology, and I'm sure you are examining all this. From the naked eye, to which I made a reference, to the optical microscope, the scanning electron microscope, the transmission electron microscope, the HRTM, and the atom probe DDA probe. I'm told that except for the atom probe, all the other instruments are available here and are put to good use in IIT. And more importantly, I feel at least a gleam in the eyes of Sundararajan and Murthy and other people that an atom probe will be here soon. Then you will have the complete list of instruments which you want to probe nature. But going back to our Ahmad Zawal, he has seen how the Egyptians had an idea of light. Very often people thought vision was something going from our eyes to the outside object. But he was the first one to show that even the Egyptians knew that the rays of sun come and hit your eye, your retina, and that is how you see the sun, and they could picture it like that. And here is the camera obscura, known as a pinhole. Many of us have played with that. That is what brings, if you like, films and images to microscopy. Otherwise, you just see one image. But now we can take image after image and put them together. And here he has put the whole thing together. I will not go through this, the microscopy timeline. If you look at the names of the people, very famous people have worked on this. Both physicists who could tell us about the nature of electrons and photons, and also engineers who would look at the structures and so on. This is the book by Robert Hooke, Micrographia of the 17th century, but now we have the 21st century. This is just a list of the instruments that are available. I'll trace the development of this in the next few minutes. The origins of microscope is good to look back because we are all excited about looking at atoms now. what are called nanoscopes, if you like, electron microscopes and so on. But that is nothing compared to the excitement that pervaded the world in the 17th century, in the 16th century. 1590, Dutch eyeglass maker made a compound microscope. Mid 17th century, Anton von Leeuwenhoek used an improved single lens microscope to describe bacteria and protozoa, etc. That's the first time something that is not visible to the naked eye was seen. And he ran around looking at every object, plants if you like, a bottle of water, call them little animals and so on and so forth. And everywhere, many rich people like to have these microscopes in their libraries to show off that they are very learned people, can look at things, invite people to come and see. And one of the persons who contributed very much to that is Robert Hooke, who of course has done many other contributions. And this is his famous picture of the ant. First time the ant structure was seen. It's an iconic figure. You will see it right through microscopy. We like to have some powerful iconic figures which will stir the imagination, not only of the scientists, not only the directors, but the secretaries of the Department of Science and Technology, prime ministers and princes and so on, so you can get fund from them, because as I told you, the eye is important. So the visual impact of getting the king of your country into a lab and say you can look at atoms, you can move that, is enormous. But the beginning for that was laid by, if you like, Robert Hooke, by publishing this picture, iconic figure of an ant. And here is the picture. This is a simple microscope which Leeuwenhoek was able to do, didn't cost very much. But today the microscopes hit, if you like, several crores of rupees. This is the picture again of that. The Micrographia was published by Robert Hooke, 1665, and that is why Ahmed Zewail is called Micrographia of the 21st century. Then of course we have the scanning electron microscope. I will not bother to describe the details because I am sure many people know. Instead of using visible light, you can use the electrons, and this has been a very powerful and useful instrument by which you can look at the surfaces of materials. And the electrons become even more helpful to us because now we can go down to much smaller resolutions. We can go down to nanometers, and as I said, picometers. It's an amazing thing. And the electrons have many interactions with the material. So you can not only look at the microstructure, you can look at the orientation, look at the analysis, and everything can be done. And the more interesting turn was given by the scanning tunneling microscopy. It took me some time to realize this is not the same thing like the optical and electron microscope, where you can draw ray diagrams. This is like seeing the world not with your eyes but with your hand. It's like a blind man going around, feeling the world around. So scanning tunneling microscope does exactly the same thing. A needle is run over the surface of a material, and depending upon the interaction, the current that flows, you are able to get an image like this. It's an amazing thing. This discovery is very important and allows for the imaging of surface metals and even semiconductors at the atomic level, developed by Gerd Binnig and Heinrich Rohrer in the IBM Zurich Research Laboratory in 1982. This is Rohrer, and they shared half of the Nobel Prize, and the other half, of course, went to Ruska. STM has fathered a host of new atom probe techniques, atomic force microscopy, scanning tunneling spectroscopy, and so on. I made a reference to my fair share of good fortune. One of them was that Professor Rohrer and myself were on the same committee for looking at the future of the Institute of Material Research at Tohoku University, Sendai, Japan. They had only Nobel laureates, but at that time there was no Nobel laureate. There is still no Nobel laureate. So they wanted me to represent India at that meeting. So here is a picture with the father of scanning tunneling microscopy. The basic principles, as I explained a few minutes ago, you run a tip over the surface, and depending upon the distance, electron tunneling takes place, and you're able to measure the distance very correctly and accurately. And here again an image comes. I told about the iconic image of an ant, but people working in IBM decided to move the atoms around and write the letters IBM. But please remember that each one of them is an atom of xenon. It's a very startling feat at that time. It was done in 1989 by Eigler and his colleagues, as it were, and has adorned the pages of many journals, many articles, and so on and so forth, showing the powerful step. Not only can we see atoms, we can move them and write if you like. And here is an interesting thing. Artists have always needed the support of patrons, scientists too. The artist, if he discovers how to move atoms with the STM, found a way to give something back to the corporation, which gave him a job when he needed one and providing with the tools he needed in order to be successful. It's like paying back to your patron, if you like, and IBM was delighted more than anything else to see their name written in such beautiful, not golden letters, but xenon letters. And atomic force microscope takes it further forward by measuring the force between the atoms, as it were. And I'll show you one picture. By using the atomic species, we can even find out what the atoms are. It is not only seeing the atoms, each of these spots is an atom, this is an atom, but we know what atom this is and what atom this is. For example, the tin is the blue atom and lead is the green atom. So this is tin, this is lead. We are able to measure like that. So this is again a further step forward, that we are so powerful with our microscopes now, we can see them, we can also name them. That's very important. This step has been taken, and how it is done is described here in this slide. And you can also now make patterns, micro patterns if you like. Here you are writing the word yes by taking atoms from one part to another, just like this pattern. I can remove a lead atom, I can remove a silicon atom, move them around and write. Look at this, writing on the atomic scale. We all know about lithography, optical lithography, electron lithography and so on. Here at the atomic level, you can etch and if you like, write the names. And this is also amazing. With the same microscope, we can look at a molecule of pentazene. It has got 32 atoms, benzene rings fused together. This was not possible some years ago. We just could measure it through X-ray and other techniques. But now we can directly see those patterns and measure what the atoms are, what the forces are. This is a great progress of imaging of molecules in terms of that. Originally, most of these microscopes were used for looking at materials, but today we can look at molecules. And I want to spend a few minutes, there's a personal element mixed in this, of imaging atoms. Long before Feynman said that we should look at atoms and the electron microscope improved, atoms are actually seen. Feynman was not aware of the fact that Kanwar Bahadur and Erwin Muller had done that job. Here is Kanwar Bahadur, not so well known. He's an Indian scientist who worked with Professor Erwin Muller in Penn State. And here is a clear thing. On October 11th, 1955, they saw the atoms for the first time. And that discovery was made by an unusual Indian, Kanwar Bahadur. Because normally, we are all so respectful to our gurus, we don't want to go against them. So Professor Muller said there is no point in cooling the tip of the microscope, nothing will happen. But Bahadur did not listen to him, just went and cooled the tip, as a result of which they got the atomic resolution. Of course, he showed it to Professor Muller. Muller was very happy, and that acknowledgement is given over here. The apocryphal story, of course, is that Muller walked into the office, went to the laboratory, saw the atoms, and thanked Bahadur very much, locked the room, went back and wrote the paper to Journal of Applied Physics. So a credit which should have come long time back to Kanwar Bahadur has taken quite some time. It was 50 years later that when they were looking at the, what we might call the original contributions that were made, here is Kanwar Bahadur here, along with David Brandon, who taught me about field ion microscopy in Cambridge. I had the good fortune to work in Cambridge and work with this field ion microscope, a very simple microscope compared to the microscopes that are available here. And my one contribution, a simple contribution, was to give a name to the microscope, Chitra. Because in Bangalore, Professor Ramachandran had called an X-ray machine from which pictures were coming as a Chitra Lekha. So I called it Chitra. Now, this is a very trivial fact in history of microscopy. But in writing the history of the Department of Metallurgy and Materials Science at Cambridge, my good colleagues have mentioned this, that Rangu gave the name Chitra to the microscope, and this microscope has since moved to the British Museum, London Science Museum. And here is the picture, which is really a wonderful achievement, and I'm hoping that very soon from IIT Madras, pictures of this type will come, and there we will not only know the atom, I was telling you about, it's important to know what atoms they are, they'll do it by their atom probe studies. This is the atom probe, where by measuring the time the atom takes to run through a certain distance, we can know what the species are. I think Professor Murthy and Gopalan and others have done already work on this type of atom probe, and some work is also being done at DMRL. So this work should gain further growth in this country and hopefully at IIT Madras. Here is work from the DMRL, nickel-based superalloy, when you can look at a whole volume of atoms and see where the various atoms are. These are the different types of atoms seen in different colors here. By artificially coloring them, we know how they are all distributed. Now, we come back to the electron microscope. A breakthrough has come. I showed you about the light microscope, which had limited resolution, half the wavelength. But the electron microscope by Ruska made a great difference when he switched over from visible light to electrons, but changing them became important, and now, thanks to aberration correction, it's possible to get to atomic resolution. I am told that the microscope is already here. Here again, we can look at atomic resolution in the best possible fashion. Now let me bring in Professor E.G. Ramachandran into this picture. This is Feynman's anticipation of electron microscopes getting improvement to that stage. This is the electron microscope, original electron microscope by Ruska. Here it is. The new building of the Department of Metallurgy at the Indian Institute of Science was opened by Sir Makshagundam Visvesvaraya in July 1948. The foundation stone contains the name of Professor Ramachandran's father because he was directing the institute at that time. And I have the feeling that Professor Ramachandran was practically running the department at that time. So we owe a great deal to him for laying a sound foundation to the department from which many of the students here also have come. Provision has been made as early as 1948 to install an electron microscope which, carrying as it does the limit of resolution of the optical microscope to a figure approaching about 25 angstroms. Today we laugh at this figure, 25 angstroms. I mean, I'm talking about picometers and so on. But at that time, it looked like the most recent tool in physical metallurgy research. So basically, this is the first electron microscope to come into this country. And I found that Professor Ramachandran had published some of the earliest papers appreciating the power of this instrument. Here in 1951, 10 years before he came here, he wrote on electron microscope and metallurgy. And also the electron microscope flourished there. And I had the good fortune, again, to look at the papers published from IISc, and in particular from the Department of Metallurgy. On the occasion of the centenary celebration, the Institute wanted to identify the best papers published. I'm happy to tell you I chose 5 papers from the early 50s. 2 of the papers were by Professor E.G. Ramachandran. It's an amazing thing. And I'm told later in his enamel days he has published papers from Nature. So he was an all-rounder, not only a teacher, a researcher, and also an industrial practitioner of metallurgy. Now this is the history of the electron microscope. I won't go through it in great detail. The first lattice image was seen in 1956. Then each time microscopes became better and better, and we now have a resolution of 50 picometers. I want to tell you this microscope proved extremely useful. One of the best studies that I did with my colleague K. Chattopadhyay and other colleagues is reported here, is discovering a new phase known as the decagonal quasicrystal. This is 1985. 81 I joined, and then 83 Professor Chattopadhyay joined us. We had a microscope, and Subbanna was mainly responsible for taking the microscope pictures. And we proved that there is a different kind of quasicrystal from that which was discovered by Shechtman, for which we got the Nobel Prize. If only we had pursued with this in a different way, I feel we could have been on the journey to Stockholm along with Danny Shechtman. But it's one of those things. And one of the areas where microscopy has been extremely useful in several dimensions, if you like, is looking at the very many allotropes of carbon. For a long time, we knew about diamond and graphite, but then came the buckyball, a round form with 60 atoms of carbon, then the carbon nanotube, and most recently, a single layer of graphene. And the discovery of all this, the elucidation of all their properties was made possible by electron microscope. We had to look at them. Of course, people conjectured about them before, but the actual evidence was provided by microscopy. So here you are, the buckyballs perhaps are seen as early as 1980, but that doesn't constitute discovery. Then the tubes, carbon nanotubes, were found in 1991 by Ijima. So the question of discovery by combinatorial in situ synthesis with atomic resolution imaging was made possible by the electron microscope. And graphene, which also won the Nobel Prize, single layer, we can look at atoms. It's an amazing feature that we can look at individual atoms of carbon, and in fact we can dope it with boron and nitrogen, make alloys if you like. It's possible to look at these molecules and materials with the microscope. Now I bring in the time element. It's an extraordinary feature. I told you that I went away geographically and metaphorically into heritage and conservation. But as I work there on heritage and conservation, I find the basis for materials heritage is materials characterization. What we use for looking at nanomaterials, quasicrystals, or buckyballs are the same techniques that we need to use for looking at ancient materials. So it's like going geographically and metaphorically far away to find that you reach home. All that I learned in my college days, in my institute days, in Laila College on chemistry, organic chemistry, and in metallurgy at IISc came back to me with strength. Here is Professor Ashby, who has mastered the art of presenting the data to us in a very easily digestible form. I think he can give some competition to Professor E.G. Ramachandran, who is known as a very lucid, known for his lucid exposition of metallurgy. Here are 2 pictures. In prehistory, 10,000 years before the contemporary era, very few materials were known. Of course, the class in which they fall is indicated here. The type of materials we have are all indicated here. But today we have this many materials. Many of the students present here might wish that we were present in 10,000 BCE because we had to contend with so few materials. Today, an enormous library of materials, array of materials available, which is shown here. Nevertheless, we can study these ancient materials and learn, if you like, from them. That is part of the story that I am going to present in the next 10 minutes. And it goes back to Cyril Stanley Smith, another hero of mine, who discovered the subject called archaeometallurgy. Archaeo means, of course, ancient, old, to look at old materials. I would like to read this quotation from him. The microstructures differ from each other than do the external forms. Because if you look at knives and axes and so on, they differ. But if you actually look into the microstructure of them, you can identify them much more properly, very clearly. And they instantly reveal to a knowing eye the technical history of making the object. Such records are in a universal language. They are not written in English or German. They are written in a universal language, and they are free from the distortion that inevitably accompanies passage through a human mind. Here follows the beautiful sentence. Through such records, I communicate with dozens of craftsmen, including a silversmith of Luristan who lived around 800 BC, a bronze founder in Shang, China, ancient Greek goldsmith, and a 13th century Japanese swordsmith. And I have understood them better than I understand some of my English-speaking colleagues today. So it's easy to communicate with somebody who lived 1,000 years ago and somebody who is sitting next to you, if you like. Though you know the same English language, there can be communication barriers. But here there is no communication barrier. He can look at that material. He says it makes accessible records of a new world, or more correctly, an unnoticed aspect of culture in the world. So if you want to discover a little more about our own culture, the ancient Indian culture, we have to do more of these studies. So, one of the earliest objects which are looked at, which has traveled through space and time, if you like, is the meteorite. It is cooled at the rate of 1 degree per million years. That means to cool down from 1000 degrees to, let us say, room temperature or so, it has taken 1 billion years. So we can look at a material which has cooled so slowly. And how do I know it has cooled so slowly? I can look at the microstructure. This is a Widman-Statten pattern, a very beautiful geometric pattern which can be seen with the naked eye. The same material, if I cool rapidly, the distance will be very small. I have to use an optical microscope. If I cool it even more rapidly, I have to use an electron microscope. So we can see that we can look at an object which existed 1 billion years ago, if you like, and still say what its history has been. And by the way, it's star stuff because it has come down from the skies, and for a long time, metallurgy was known as siderurgy, the science of star-like objects. So I feel all metallurgists should feel that we are actually looking at objects that have come from the stars that existed, if you like, billions of years ago. Also, in order not to make the other people from other disciplines feel unhappy, I want to say we are all made of star stuff. Carl Sagan has written very beautifully that all the atoms are synthesized very early on, almost 15 billion years ago, in the interior of stars by a stellar alchemy. So those atoms are the ones which exist in our bodies, so we are all made of star stuff. So I often say it's not just Aishwarya Rai, but all of us are also stars. Now, this led me to study the wood steel along with my colleague Sharda Srinivasan at NIAS. We could find out the significance of wood steel, which is an encounter between ancient steel and modern science. So we can look at an ancient steel but use modern science. And there is an interplay. The ancient steel allows us to study modern science. It gave birth to modern science. Then we can use modern science to look at even more ancient steel. And it is a virtuous cycle, if you like. And we can know where all are the spreading of this smelting technology, how it has gone from one area to another. And this is the most beautiful thing that Cyril Stanley Smith pointed out, that the material science paradigm, our understanding that the synthesis leads to a structure, the structure determines properties, and the property leads to performance, on which we base the whole of material science. The whole department of material engineering must be teaching that, is actually coming from a study of the wood steel. It is such a fantastic steel produced in these parts, in Salem, if you like, in Mysore, in a number of places in northern Telangana. All those steels were the envy of the world for a long time. They were so wonderful, the British could not identify what was the reason. Then they gave it to Michael Faraday, who was the son of a blacksmith, to study that. He thought this is iron with gold and platinum added to that. He failed. And then it was unraveled. That's iron with a high quantity of carbon, ultra high carbon. And here is a study by Professor Balasubramaniam. We lost him too soon. He studied, for example, a number of metallic objects, including the wood steel. They used texture measurements and other things to find out how the ancient blacksmiths spoke. So the blacksmiths could speak to Balasubramaniam because Bala was able to etch these structures and see what has been done by them. And I must draw attention to the Delhi iron pillar. This is an ancient object, 1600 years old. It has stayed rustless for this period. And Balasubramaniam brought it to life. He took it in his hand, as it were, turned it around, talked about its corrosion resistance, talked about the inscriptions there and how they were made, and analyzed them, every bit of it. It was 1912 that Hatfield had come to India and drew attention to this magnificent structure. It was the largest forge welded structure in all of on the Earth's planet surface, and an extraordinarily impressive object. But its true secret was unveiled by Balasubramaniam, and colleagues here at Kalpakkam, some of them are present here, have studied the microstructure. Of course, you are not allowed to take this sample to your lab, so you do in situ metrology. Maldeira, Jaikumar and others have looked at it, shows the microstructure. So we can study how this pillar was made by looking at the structures. It was not cast in one piece. You can see the variation in the microstructure and so on. I am going to reveal to you something which is not yet official. The American Society for Materials identifies some as historical landmarks. They identified the zinc smelting at Zawar as a historical landmark. I am happy to say that we were requested to submit a proposal on the Delhi iron pillar. This has been accepted by them. The official communication awaited from them. I think it's a very happy moment that Indian contributions will be fully recognized, not only the present contribution. This goes back, if you like, 1600 years to the golden era of Gupta. Now, what can archaeology get from science? I'm going to say a few minutes about the bronze, which is also an important product of the Indian culture and civilization. Did they diffuse from one part to another? We all know about the spice route, the Silk Road. Apparently, there was also a great bronze road through which the technology is transferred. That's called diffusion. Where was the first bronze alloy made? Mesopotamia, Egypt, the steppes. Where did the tin come from? Invention of the lost wax method of casting, India and Europe. I'm not giving a full lecture on heritage, but India mastered the lost wax method 2500 BC, 4500 years ago. If you go to Mohenjo-daro at the time, 4500 years, the famous dancing girl was made by the lost wax method. Height in bronzes is a major exercise in alloying. If you add too much bronze, then it is brittle. How to overcome that? Did it come from Thailand to India or go from India to Thailand? How do you do this? And then, of course, we have beautiful mirrors. We have worked on this, and you must recognize that our ancient craftsmen and technologists were able to make all these products with the knowledge that we have today at our fingertips. This is the phase diagram. The phase diagram was established only in 1904. But for 5,000 years before that, people are working at these compositions or these temperatures without exactly knowing this diagram, but are able to master that. That's an amazing feat. And our colleagues at Kalpakkam again have looked at the bronze idols, how to characterize them, ascertain the age and period, obtain insight into manufacturing technologies, evaluate the damage to evolved conservation measures. This is very important. So they used high precision digital photography, radiography, X-ray fluorescence, in situ metrology. So you can see the space is there, the time factor is also there when it was made. And it's an important factor, and I find every other week I find some more idols are discovered in Tamil Nadu. You must know when they were made, how they were made, and also make sure they are not spirited away by the wonderful art collectors from abroad. And I put them together into what I would call modern language, the materials tetrahedron. Here is the Swami Malai method of making idols by the lost wax method. Here is the quenching and making of the beta tin bronze. Here is the mirror being made in Aranmula. So three different compositions, if you like. So we make from Swami Malai this type of idols of Nataraja. We make these vessels and we make these mirrors. How to correlate it with the phase diagrams? This can be done across time and space. And it looks like our collaboration with the Japanese have shown now that basically these techniques originated in India and then moved to China, to Korea and Japan, and moved this way to Thailand. This is important. This has to be established, of course, with the best possible facts and figures, but we are on the way to show that India gave to two ultra-high alloyed materials. I told you the wood steel contains a large amount of carbon, poses technological problems. It's very brittle, but we mastered that. The British and the Vikings could not do that. And similarly, bronze, if you add a large amount of tin, becomes very strong but brittle. Again, we overcame that. So it's an amazing feat in alloying that we were the first to make those two things. And now I spend a few minutes on molecules. Till then, I was focused only on microscopes. Suddenly, my eyes opened up by going to Japan. That's important to look at various kinds of visible spectrum, infrared, ultraviolet, and of course X-rays. I was familiar with that. But I know by using visible, infrared, and ultraviolet, you can do a lot of characterization of materials. And I wish to invoke Professor Ramachandran's guru, C.V. Raman. When I was a student in metallurgy, we used to get the invitation for the Gandhi Memorial Lecture by C.V. Raman. He organized it every year. Of course, he gave the lecture himself. One of them was on diamond, which is a beautiful lecture. And we all got nicely printed invitation. Mr. S. Ranganathan Esquire, and so on. So I listened to his lecture. And there was an inspiring moment because he instilled confidence in us. He used to talk about throwing Max Bond into the Bay of Bengal because he's wrong and so on. So this confidence that he eschewed and gave to us is an important part of the training I had. But what has happened is that Raman effect has become extraordinarily powerful. Of course, he got the Nobel Prize. He knew full well that he was going to get the Nobel Prize. But invention of laser makes the Raman experiments reasonable. Surface enhanced Raman spectrum discovered, and it's possible not too long ago that a single molecule can be analyzed by the Raman spectroscopy. It's an amazing fact that I was talking about looking at atoms and so on using microscopes and so on. Here you are using spectroscopy with which you can find a single molecule. As one of the emails said, Raman is no longer a noun, it's an adjective. So Raman effect, Raman scattering, Raman, etc. And this shows the principles of the Raman resonance enhanced scattering and how it requires tunable laser as a light source. So very small amounts can be detected. This is an example of not Raman spectroscopy, of microscopy using the Mayan murals, the blue colors. It has been shown by our colleagues from Mexico, the Maya blue pigment, it still stays blue. So we are going now to old materials. It's actually a nanocomposite of organic and inorganic constituents, primarily indigo dyes derived from the leaves of anil plants combined with a natural clay. I'm sure many of the colleagues here are working on such composite materials. It's an amazing thing. And I had to go to Japan to discover that. I said wood steel was one of the most important contributions from India. Indigo is an equally important contribution. The blue dye, India was the master of that. And almost the Western civilization came to its knees because they were so fond of this blue color. They bought so much from that, they became bankrupt as it were. So, but that is a molecule kind of thing, not a material kind of thing. So it becomes important to use a variety of techniques, and we can go back in time. And here is an example of a picture taken to figure out the mystery of why this angel from a Byzantine illuminated manuscript appears to be black. So one can analyze with Raman spectroscopy each one of those portions, what those minerals are, and then decide what has happened. This is an amazing thing, that we can look at pigments, which can be mineral pigments, which can be organic dyes, and therefore we can use both material and molecular structure, use spectroscopy to analyze them. And here is another one, it's a Russian icon. We can use now micro X-ray fluorescence and micro Raman. So Raman microscopy, something which I was not too familiar, the microscope, optical microscope and so on, but you can use Raman techniques. So we can look at the painted panel, what is the nature of the paint, traditional substrate material, and known paint layer order. It's an amazing feature that we can look at these materials which have been existing for a few centuries, at least in this case, and analyze them, and look at layers below. The papers are full of that. And as part of the enjoyment I had in Japan was to look at their paintings. And one of the discoveries I made, this is again a discovery, I thought I'll go and learn about Buddhism and Shintoism, but I learned a great deal more about Hinduism. Buddhism, when it traveled from India to China, took along with it Buddhism, took along with it Hinduism. Because Buddha, I didn't realize, or Buddhism, absorbed many of the deities of Hinduism so that the religion can spread smoothly and evenly across the continent. So they took Saraswati as one of the goddess of learning, and Saraswati traveled, if you like, to China to Korea, and now is enshrined in Japan. She is perhaps worshipped there more than in India. The number of temples devoted to Saraswati are absolutely amazing. And instead of a veena, she has a lute. This is a picture of a lute. And what is interesting here is this painting has been done, and one wants to know what is the color in order to restore that. This blue color, is it indigo, our Indian color, or Prussian blue? I also discovered, I like to share it with the young colleagues, that when Saraswati traveled from India to China and China to Korea, I want to call her now an Asian goddess. But we find more about Saraswati and her qualities and so on inscribed in the manuscripts held in the Dunhuang caves in China. Because there, the Buddhist monks wrote down everything. In India itself, we didn't write, or even if we wrote, those manuscripts are all lost. So if you want to learn about India, you have to go to Japan, you have to go to China, you have to go to Korea, because these are all inscribed there. So it's an amazing thing. So I gave this as a question. Is it blue indigo or Prussian blue? How will you discover that? To the Japanese students whom I was teaching. I'm coming to the end of my lecture now. 4D microscopy. Professor Ahmed Zivaid, who is a student of Linus Pauling and also winner of the Nobel Prize, showed that it's possible to use ultra-fast single electron imaging. So you can take pictures very quickly, femtosecond pictures if you like, put them all together and see not only in 3 dimensions the structure, but also in time. So you can see a whole movie as to how that is oscillating. So we are now reaching the stage of what Kelvin and Neumann and Feynman only dreamed about. Kelvin was the first one who said, to understand anything, you must be able to measure it. Important. As scientists, as physicists, as electrical engineers, we want to measure. We can talk about something only if you can measure. Von Neumann, who was a computer scientist, said he must be able to compute that. He must be able to do the calculations for that, if you like. But Feynman went one step further. He said to understand anything, you must be able to create it. We already have it in biology to a large extent, the double helix, genetic code, recent sense of the artificial cell, and if you like artificial life, they claim they can revive extinct dinosaurs, and so on. I feel in materials also we can do the same thing. We can create new materials by understanding, measuring, calculating, and designing them. And perhaps more importantly, some of the old materials, just as we can revive the extinct dinosaurs, the pigments that were used 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago in Egypt, if you go into the tombs, you find all kinds of fascinating pigments. Some of them are still there. You can analyze and recreate them if you like. Friends, I have taken you across time and space. It's been a very exciting journey for me, and I'm sure all of you in your own ways are doing that. So it's a pleasure for me to dedicate this lecture to Professor E.G. Ramachandran. I owe my work, of course, to many of my colleagues, in particular Chattopadhyay, Ramachandra Rao, and many students here. I listed only some of them, including Murthy here. And also in Bangalore, Professor Brahmprakash was the first Indian head of the department. Professor Ramachandran, as I said earlier, set up the part of the department at that time, then Anantharam and Abraham. In Cambridge, I had the good fortune to work under Cottrell and Brandon, a friend of Sheckman, and 2 people who have had a major influence are Professor Kuo from China, Alan Mackay from UK, Professor John Kahn. I think Jaisurya Basu recently was in Washington, was visiting with him. He was a bit surprised that John Kahn was making inquiries about me, that whether I'm still working and so on. He can assure him now, yes, Professor Ranganathan is still at work, and of course K.F. Kelton. I want to thank you for your patient listening. I hope you enjoyed this, that today we are at a remarkable crest in science and technology. We can look at across time and space. This is only one part of what you are able to look at. We can go back 1 billion years if you like, 1,000 years, 100 years. We can look at things as they're happening and go from, if you like, 1 dimension to 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions by adding time. And the quasi-crystals where I worked will allows me to take me to places where you may find difficult to enter. Some of those quasi-crystals actually exist as pure crystals in 5 and 6 dimensions. But they are captured, if you like, imprisoned in 3 dimensions as, if you like, decagonal quasi-crystals and isosceles quasi-crystals. So we have savored the influence of time and space, not only in the normal 3 dimensions and the 1 dimension of time, but in 4, 5, 6. I think ultimately imagination is the only limit. And I only wish 50 years ago my teachers have taught me that imagination is more important than knowledge. Somehow I felt knowledge was very important. I gathered a great deal of it. But it's equally important to allow your imagination to work with it. Thank you very much.
Maybe it's better we discuss during the tea break rather than going ahead with certain questions. So I would like to thank Professor Ranganathan. It's always amazing to listen to him. And as we always say that though I don't drink wine, but people say as the wine becomes older, okay, it tastes better. So it's similarly, the more the years pass, I think listening to Professor Ranganathan becomes more and more amazing. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sparing your time and coming all the way and then sharing this exciting field with all of us.
No, I was not to be thanked for that. I thought it's a duty and a great pleasure. You know, very often the duty is not so pleasurable, the pleasure is not such a duty, but here I could combine both. It's a heady cocktail. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank once again Bukhraj, who has made this day for all of us. And I would also like to thank Professor EGR for taking pains to come and be amongst all of us and making all of us happy to be with him. And I would like to thank Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy for gracing this occasion. I would also like to thank three of my colleagues, Fani, Ravishankar and Ranjit, who are at the back of this whole function, did a lot of things for making this function happen. I would like to thank all the students of Professor EGR who have, and his admirers, who have taken pains to come all the way. In fact, I see somebody who have come from Pune to listen to this lecture. I'm really thankful to all of them. Some who could come, some who could not come, but watching Professor EGR far away sitting. So I would like to thank all of them and thank you all for coming for this lecture. Thank you very much. I request all of you to join us for a tea waiting in the dining hall. Thank you, sir.
Chandra was going to come, but he said he's in London.
No,
So
he's gone to London.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to see you before. Father, I think a lot of people are waiting to see you.
Okay.
Can I take a picture of this, sir?